Hey guys, this is going to be a video on why you should do as many contests as possible in competitive programming, and also how you can learn from them and what information you can get. So most of the things in this video are my opinion, but I personally think the value of contests is quite overlooked. Some of the stuff I'll be saying may seem rather obvious, of course, but there should be something here for almost everyone, especially the part about rating and why it doesn't matter, which will come up. So in brief, I'm going to cover why you should do as many contests as possible, why you shouldn't be scared about rating and losing it because it's not that big a deal, what information contests can give you, and how to best use that information to both learn from the contests and tailor your practicing to your weaknesses that you know of. Alright, so I promise you this video isn't sponsored, but this section may come off as a bit of an advertisement for programming contest sites because I want to emphasize just how important contests can be. And if you happen to know me, and from my screencasts and my Codeforces stuff, before you call me out for not doing a contest for 3 months and then making this video and being a huge hypocrite, just let me clarify that, like, if you're unable to or don't want to do contests, that's also totally fine. If you don't have time to put into competitive programming, that's also fine. That's sort of what happened with me. So you definitely shouldn't force yourself to do anything, of course. But if you do have the time to practice and do things, then I would say you should at least spend some of that time also doing contests, not just completely practicing. So I would imagine that a lot of people, basically almost everyone, practices competitive programming to get good at contests. For example, sites like Codeforces, Olympiads like the IOI, ICPC maybe, and things like interview tests even. If not, that's up to you, and that's also totally fine. But if so, you want to get good at contests, so you should definitely be doing contests to practice. Like, that's what you're doing, so why not get that experience? Now, practicing problems alone helps you get good at individual problems and that sort of solving, which is, of course, definitely a good skill. But that's not all you need for contests. There are certain things that you can't really get out of practicing because it's sort of like a problem set thing versus individual problems. For example, you need stuff like endurance to be able to think and code for over 2 hours. Usually contests last that long. You need some sort of strategy often, like looking at standings and seeing how weird problems are. Especially with the less balanced contests, sometimes it's better to adjust the problem you're going for based on which one is the most solved, and you have to be able to switch on the fly. And also just mentality in general, like not freaking out about performance and things. All of these are things you can easily improve by doing contests, but not so much with practice because it's individual problems versus whole problem sets. In addition, many problems are from old contests, and in solo practicing, those problems are going to be less helpful because they're less relevant to the current contest. Like on Codeforces, many old problems are centered around algorithms and data structures, but new contests are much more like around ad hoc and things like that. Learning a bunch of algorithms and data structures and getting good at getting good at those problems will help, but it won't help as much as actually practicing the modern problems. Whereas, and this is definitely one of the obvious things, that problems that show up in contests will show up in contests. That is, like, the problems you encounter during contests are going to represent the modern problem sets and will help you both on that contest and the future ones. So I'm not saying you should spend all of your time doing contests or virtual contests. Just take the opportunities that you get, basically. You shouldn't skip contests. You should do what you're able to. And in terms of virtual contests, which is like participation but unofficially and sort of at a different time than the normal contest without any sort of like rating pressure, it's also good. And despite the problem of problems being old and outdated, it still helps you practice the skills that I mentioned, like endurance, strategy, mentality, things like that. The problem is that it may be taken less seriously, but it is possible to remedy that by like doing something like imposing a virtual rating system or just caring less about rating in general. So now, on the subject of rating, I also believe that many people, which used to include myself, take rating like way too seriously. And it's often a factor in people deciding to not do contests just because of rating. But I think this is not a good approach to take. And even a few bad contests in a row, like many bad performances back to back, won't make that much of a difference in the long run, which I will show shortly. So here's my own rating graph. As you can see, it has a lot of downs, a lot of losses, and then they're quickly remedied by rating gains of similar size. So even though I was in the orange zone for a long while, eventually I got out of it. Because despite having a bunch of rating losses, I also gained rating throughout contests. And in general, there's like a clear progression. You can try to draw a line through it if you want. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Of course, not everyone's rating graph will be like this, but nonetheless, you'll be able to overcome the losses. As long as you yourself are improving, the individual like bad performances, the anomalies won't matter as much. So I did a bit of experimentation to try and verify this. And I basically used this site called Codeforces Visualizer, or CFViz for short, which does a lot of cool things that includes predicting rating. That is, you could imagine that you took a contest at a certain rating, and then you could predict your rating change given your certain rank and your certain previous rating, despite maybe not having taken that contest at all. So you can give it any contest, any ranking, and any previous rating, and it will output your rating change. So it's pretty cool. You can see this site in the description. I used it a lot. So my first experiment was something I wrote a blog on before. If you want to see, you can see it in the description. But basically what I did was I tried completely removing my worst rating loss, a -166, from my contest history. And then afterwards, I simulated the next 6 contests without having that rating loss on CFViz to see what my rating would end up being. And despite the loss being massive, a -166, after the 6 contests had passed, it only amounted to a difference of 25 rating points. So after 6 contests, a -166 was diminished to a -25. And that's just the way rating works, because it prioritizes earlier contests. So then I decided to take this a step further. And I reran my entire Codeforces contest history, except I ignored every single rating loss. That is, if it was a rating loss, I set it flat to 0 and ignored the change. And let's see how this turned out. This is slightly invalid because it assumes I'll be in Div 2s when I'm possibly ineligible, like for example being a master and taking a Div 2. But that's more optimistic anyway, since being in Div 1s are hard, so being in 1900 and taking a Div 1 contest instead of a Div 2 contest would give me worse performance, because at the bottom of the ladder, like at very low CM, or candidate master, it's quite hard to gain rating in Div 1s. So this is like strictly more optimistic, because again, also adding a contest can't decrease the rating estimate anyway, because it either increases or stays the same estimate. So here are the results. And over the entire 1.5 year history of my Codeforces participation, removing all of my negative rating changes only caused the difference of a whopping 50 rating. 1.5 years, 50 contests, 50 rating over 50 contests. That's what removing all of my negative rating changes did. Like, it's not a big deal. Your rating is eventually going to become what it should be. If you want all the data I use, you can find the spreadsheet and the blog I used in the description. But yeah, take it easy, honestly. Your bad rating losses are eventually going to just become insignificant. That's just how rating works. Now, as you see, taking the long run into account, your rating's going to converge to your true skill. And so now, calling out some specific people here, including myself at some points. If you like hold off on contests and you like skip them just to maintain some certain title, after a while, because rating is supposed to represent your current skill, like you may just not deserve it anymore. And that's not what rating is about. You're basically emphasizing the effect of an outlier, like a huge good performance that may have brought your rating up. And it's like, it's not accurate. Eventually, you're going to stop deserving your title, because the point of rating is that it's supposed to be your current skill level. So I don't think that's a good strategy either, just entirely skipping contests to keep some rank. And of course, I circled the points on my rating graph where I did this myself. I'm not a saint. I will admit that throughout this video. But it's never too late to change your mentality. So overall, rating really shouldn't be a factor in whether you do contests or not. You can trust the system. It's going to eventually converge to your true skill. Even if you have some variance, that's what it's going to be around, that level. And even if you have like a streak of bad contests and just totally screw up back to back to back to back to back, as I've shown, it's eventually going to stop mattering. And your rating is still going to converge eventually. Alright, now let's delve a bit deeper into the actual information you can gain from the contest you do. So, unless you won the round, and actually even if you won the round, there's something you could have done better, because you could have gotten some higher score. You could have submitted a minute earlier, you could have been faster, you could have gotten another problem. There are so many things you might have been able to do better. And of course, the process of problem solving is kind of random. You think of random ideas, some of them work, it depends on what ideas you get. Sometimes it's just not easy, especially with the ad hoc and constructive-like problems. So there may be things you just simply can't improve apart from getting more experience. And that, again, comes down to practice and doing contests. But on the areas where you can improve, you should be able to figure that out. So if you made some mistake that you already know about, like you made some bug and you figured it out shortly after, then great. Then you can spend time and work towards not doing that again in the future, whatever it may be. But there are also some general things to improve that you can look out for, and you can see your own performance and see if you lacked in these areas, for example. Like, speed is a huge factor. Ranking basically completely depends on it. To cite an example, like Goodbye 2020, the last contest of 2020, which it was a combined round, and basically ranks 193 to 1061, roughly, like the numbers are maybe a bit off, but roughly, had only problems A to F. Like, the span of those 800 ranks would depend entirely on how quickly you solved the problems A to F. And in fact, this speed made the difference between an international Grandmaster level performance and a candidate master level performance. A gap of comes out to a gap of 500 or 600 rating. It's enormous. That's the difference that speed does. At least that's your performance, which would mean a rating change difference of 150 or something. It's huge. Speed is enormous. So that's one thing. You can also try if you've gotten a lot of penalties or failed system tests somehow, you should find some process of being more cautious so that doesn't happen again, because also penalties are huge, and especially failing system tests on a problem just sucks. If that's all good, it may come down to just solving the next problem and just getting better so that you're able to attempt the next problem and challenge it. But there could also be some other reasons you may have failed the current problem, or the problem that you didn't get. Like certain subjects that you did badly in, for example, like strings or something. If you're bad at string problems, that's possible. You should identify that and get rid of that weakness. Possibly if you failed implementation, that's one thing to work on too. I mean, in general, you should, it tells you what to focus on, and you should be able to take a couple of minutes and just reflect on what happened during the whole contest and see, again, where you could have improved. So we can take another example, again with Goodbye 2020. So my own performance in this contest was rank 202. I ended up going incredibly fast on A to F, one of my best speed contests, which was good. But as you can see from the minuses on G, I ended up screwing up the implementation. And over 2 hours, I didn't get anything. It just sucked. I totally screwed up the implementation. I had the right idea, but I couldn't code it. So that was sad, but now I know what I'm lacking in. I need to get better at coding hard problems and messy details and things like that. So yeah, you can use your own contest experiences to figure out what you can improve the best and what's most important to improve. Because anything you fail in a contest is something that could have given you a better performance, but it didn't because you messed that up somehow. Alright, let's talk about upsolving now. So just look deep into your soul, into the dark and foggy abyss of your memories, and yeah, I don't know what I'm saying either, but ask yourself, for the last contest you did, and for the next problem that you weren't able to solve, would you be able to solve that now? If you redid that contest, would you get that problem? Because if not, you probably haven't taken advantage of the contest enough. Each contest will tell you about your weaknesses. It'll tell you what you aren't able to do, or what your perhaps bad at or slow at in terms of topics and things like that. And failing a problem probably just means that you need more practice in that area. So I would say that it's a reasonable strategy, not a necessary strategy, of course. People can get good without this, but I would say it's a reasonable strategy to not only upsolve the problems that you don't get in contests, but also to focus your practice on similar problems, so you'll be able to handle them in the future. And then you can answer yes to the question I just had you ask yourself. Because, like, when you fail a problem in a contest, you know that problem is going to come up on contest because it just did come up on a contest. So a similar problem may very well come up on a contest again. If you have some subject that you're completely lacking in, you should take lessons from the contests you do and try and improve that so that it doesn't screw you over again. So I have another example of my own case, and it was how I didn't do this and then ended up screwing me over. So for the longest time, I had this like deep and rooted fear of string problems. Like in practice, and both in practice and in contests, I just like hated them. Somehow everything felt like it was some advanced algorithm. I was too scared to like try things. I don't know why, but that's what it was. And yeah, I was terrible at them. I could only solve them at the most basic levels. So this became a problem during contests because like it sort of affected my mentality. So in global round 7, where you can see I failed system tests on the 4th problem, which was the easier subtask of a string problem, and then I didn't even get D2 at all because it was the hardest subtask of that. Because of that string problem, I got a minus 166. That's what caused that, basically. It was a string problem. And it was basically just because I was too scared to actually think about it and make the proper observations. So that sucked. And ultimately caused by some bug in implementation as well. Drop my mouse. And later on, I didn't fix this. I didn't really I just kind of ignored this contest, which is the exact thing I'm advising you not to do because it was just so terrible. And then I upsolved this problem months later or something, but it was not good because I didn't get over my fear of strings. It just strengthened my fear of strings, actually, just because of that problem. So I had my biggest rating loss, and I basically learned nothing from it. So then later on, in another round, round 365, after I'd started to recover my rating back, that one hit me again. Not as hard, with a minus 67, but it was another string problem that totally screwed me over. And it gave me a bad performance because I wasn't able to approach it. I actually, instead, because of this irrational fear of strings, I went on to the next problem, problem D, which turned out to be impossible. It was like 3,000 difficulty or something. So that was doomed to fail. I probably was able to solve C if I had just tried harder and not been irrationally scared of strings. So that was the breaking point. After that, I realized I just need to do this. Otherwise, I'm going to keep getting screwed by this. So from these rating losses, I eventually learned I suck at strings. So then I went on a killing spree and did a ton of string problems, basically just to get comfortable with them and give myself the confidence to approach them later in contests. And it almost worked, actually. At the very least, in Goodbye 2020, which was my most recent contest, the G I was talking about was a string problem of 2600 difficulty. And I did get the correct idea, as I mentioned. So I did better than Global Round 7 and Round 635, because I did get the correct idea here for a rather hard string problem. It just ended up being implementation that screwed me over. But it's progress. And now that I'm learning from Goodbye 2022, or Goodbye 2020 as well, I can be even stronger at strings because I know I kind of maybe still suck at them. So yeah, it's implementation that's the barrier. But anyway, you can do things like these. You can figure out what you need to do. In my case, upsolving only the string problems wasn't enough because I still had the fear of strings. So what I did was I took it a bit further and I started I went on a string crusade and just killed a bunch of easier string problems and got comfortable with them. And that was because of this double whammy failure that hit me on these two contests. So essentially, to briefly summarize, do many contests, as many as you can. Don't be scared about rating because eventually your rating will converge to your skill. So what you should be more concerned about is your skill, and the best way to improve your skill is to do practice and contests. In contests and afterwards, you can also observe what you can do to improve better or what mistakes you've been making. And possibly, not necessarily, but possibly upsolve like whole categories of problems rather than just single problems. It may be a viable strategy. So yeah, hopefully this all makes sense, and at the very least is sort of like reasonable. And I mean, again, it's only my opinion, and you don't have to follow it to the word. It's just recommendations. But definitely at least part of it is backed by experience and or math in the case of the rating. So there's some credibility to what I'm saying, hopefully. And yeah, that's all I have. See you guys.